Tonight, on First at 9 this Thursday, the 27th of June 2024. Welcome. International Monetary Fund welcomes Sri Lanka's finalization of debt agreements with its major official creditors. Hopes for swift progress with external private creditors in the near future. Be cautious. Main opposition comments on the final agreements reached with bilateral creditor nations. Asks the government to proceed cautiously with private bondholders. Debt for Nature. Sri Lanka able to move into Debt for Nature initiative as the country successfully achieves final agreements with external bondholders, claims senior advisor on climate change Ruwan Wijewardena. Future expectations. President highlights the need for economic revival to provide more relief going forward.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
මේ වෙලාවේ රනිල් තමයි.
From Derana, this is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to Derana First at 9. I'm Aditya Singha joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and around the world. Now taking you straight to your top story this evening, the International Monetary Fund welcomed the announcement of Sri Lanka's finalization of its debt agreements with its major official creditors, highlighting the agreements as a key milestone that Sri Lanka is one step closer to completing its debt restructuring and restoring debt sustainability. The IMF is hopeful that there will be swift progress on reaching agreements with its external private creditors in the near future. Yesterday, Sri Lanka signed agreements on restructuring bilateral debt amounting to around $11 billion with creditor nations including China and the official creditor committee comprising India, Japan and members of the Paris Club.
In a statement, the International Monetary Fund's Senior Mission Chief for Sri Lanka, Peter Brewer, stated that Sri Lanka's agreement with the bilateral creditors, including China and the official creditor committee, which includes France, India and Japan, are a key milestone and takes Sri Lanka one step closer to completing its debt restructuring and restoring debt sustainability. Brewer added that the IMF hopes that there will be swift progress on reaching agreements with external private creditors in the near future. After nearly a year of negotiations with the IMF, its executive board approved a $2.9 billion extended fund facility arrangement for Sri Lanka to restore the island nation's macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability, mitigate the economic impact on the poor and vulnerable, safeguard financial sector stability, and strengthen governance and growth potential. Under the agreement, which was approved on condition, Sri Lanka will receive the $2.9 billion in funding in 8 tranches, each amounting to around $330 million. One of the most crucial conditions was to restructure both external bilateral and private debt. Yesterday in Paris, Sri Lanka signed agreements with the official creditor committee, which includes Paris Club members, India and Japan, to restructure $5.8 billion of its debt. In a statement following the signing of the agreements, the Paris Club highlighted that the official creditor committee also expects that the Sri Lankan authorities will continue to engage with their private creditors to promptly reach an agreement on terms at least as favorable as the terms offered by the OCC. Later in the evening, Sri Lankan ambassador designate to China Majinta Jayasinghe signed debt treatment agreements with the Export-Import Bank of China in Beijing to restructure $4.2 billion of debt. Under the restructuring plan, Sri Lanka, whose total external debt is $37 billion, aims to reduce it by $16.9 billion. In his address to the nation yesterday, President Ranil Wickremesinghe explained how the debt restructuring agreements will benefit the country's economy and the government's ongoing engagements with private creditors.
මේ එකතාවයන් සමග විදේශ රටවල සියලු දෙපාර්ශ්වික
With these agreements, we will be able to postpone the repayment of bilateral debt until 2028. From 2028 onwards, we will receive a time period until 2043 to settle these debts on concessional terms. We concluded domestic debt restructuring in 2023. We are now able to conclude the restructuring of bilateral debt. Arriving at an agreement with the private creditors, including international sovereign bondholders, is our next step. If we continue in the same path, we will be able to arrive at these agreements. The discussions in this regard are continuing. The economy will receive breathing space as a result of these agreements we reached today. In 2022, 9.2% of our GDP accounted for debt repayment. Between 2027 and 2042, our debt repayment as a percentage of GDP will be at a lower level at 4.5% or lower.
ණය ගෙවීම දලදේශීය නිෂ්පාදනයේ 4.5කටත් අඩු ප්‍රමාණයක් පවත්වාගෙන යාමට දැන් අපට ඉඩ සැලසෙවි.
In a statement, the President's office stated that, beyond immediate fiscal benefits, the agreements pave the way for renewed bilateral financing opportunities essential for resuming critical infrastructure projects. This infusion of foreign investment is anticipated to invigorate sectors such as construction, bolstering job creation and economic resilience. Further, the PMD added that successful restructuring sets the stage for potential improvements in Sri Lanka's credit ratings once agreements with commercial bondholders are finalized. Enhanced credit ratings are expected to reduce the cost of foreign financing and facilitate easy access to international capital markets, fostering broader economic stability and growth. The President's office stated that, looking ahead, Sri Lanka remains committed to finalizing agreements with commercial bondholders swiftly, building on the momentum gained from these landmark restructuring deals. The concerted efforts underscore Sri Lanka's determination to navigate complex financial challenges, positioning the nation for a sustainable and robust economic recovery.
Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
Now, following the successful conclusion of a debt restructuring deal with its bilateral creditors yesterday, Sri Lanka's senior advisor on climate change, Ruwan Wijewardena, highlighted that the country can now explore the possibility of securing additional relief through Debt for Nature initiatives. Joining our current affairs program at Hyde Park with Indivari Amuwatta, Wijewardena mentioned that Sri Lanka had been eager to pursue Debt for Nature initiatives, which had been delayed due to ongoing talks on external debt restructuring. In addition, Wijewardena commented on the recent launch of Starlink, a satellite-based internet service, stating that the President plans to discuss the potential introduction of SpaceX technology to Sri Lanka with billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk.
Institute for Environment and Development revealed that Debt for Nature swaps could provide up to $100 billion for developing and poor countries to fight against climate change. Where does Sri Lanka stand here? And secondly, also, President said that Sri Lanka must find funds to combat climate change. Why must a country like Sri Lanka find money to combat climate change?
So this is, I think, an issue that not only for Sri Lanka, but if you look at countries in the global south, it's an issue. Which is why President Wickremesinghe brought two initiatives last year at the COP. One was Climate Justice Forum initiative, and one was the Tropical Belt initiative. If you take the Climate Justice Forum initiative, it's basically countries in the global south, mainly developing countries like us, facing the brunt of climate issues, but also this initiative is to there's a collective of these countries asking their creditor countries to cut off some of the debt so that we can use that money to protect our own environment and all, and to mitigate the impact on these climate issues that we are facing. The Tropical Belt initiative is basically, if you look at the countries that are with the equator and from between the equator and the Cape of Cancer and the Cape of Capricorn, there are roughly about 143 countries, and within these 143 countries, a significant amount of population living in these countries. So the Tropical Belt initiative is basically asking countries in the global north, the developed countries, to invest more in countries in the tropical belt in the 143 countries, because these countries are the most economically vulnerable countries as well as climate vulnerable countries. So the initiative is to ask developed countries to invest more on renewable energy in these countries and on environment project, on preserving the rainforests. And there is a lot of options there now for countries like us to access climate finance, to help us face up to all these climate issues. We've been actually looking at debt to nature swap. We've been also talking to the central bank, the governor of the central bank, the finance ministry. So at that point, what the discussion was, let's wait till the debt restructuring is done, because if you try to bring in another negotiation into that, it will just confuse the whole thing. So now, since yesterday, since we have signed this, now it's the time to start looking at getting the process of debt to nature swaps to go forward.
Talking about Elon Musk, were there any other discussions focusing on funding or investments in Sri Lanka?
President Wickremesinghe is quite keen on not only having Starlink, but having SpaceX coming here and investing in Sri Lanka as well. Having Elon Musk come here is enough to open doors for other investors around the world to come into Sri Lanka.
Horizon Campus 2024 intake. Register now.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says the government is exaggerating the success of Sri Lanka's debt restructuring agreements with its bilateral creditors. Speaking at an event in Kalutara, the opposition leader highlighted the government has failed to postpone bilateral debt repayments until 2033 as proposed in the International Monetary Fund's report, and that there has been no reduction in the amount of interest that the country has to pay.
Another iteration of the Sakwala program was held at Remuna Mahavidyalaya in Maduravela under the patronage of opposition leader Sajith Premadasa.
If the debt restructuring process is beneficial for the country, the Samaga Jana Balawegaya will fully support it. However, several concerning issues have come to light. We have until 2028 to recommence debt repayments. I would like to remind the government that in the debt sustainability analysis of the 2023 IMF report, it says that we only have to recommence debt repayments in 2033. Why weren't we able to postpone the debt repayments until 2033 during the discussions with bilateral creditors? We expect answers to this question. The debt restructuring process is still not complete. How can the government claim that Sri Lanka restructured its debts better than any other country without actually completing the debt restructuring process? According to our information, there has not been any reduction in the interest that we have to pay. Not only that, we have to pay an extra 4% in interest.
Now, while commending the government for reaching agreements with its bilateral creditors on debt restructuring, Parliamentarian of the Samaga Jana Balawegaya, Dr. Harsha De Silva, is of the view that the contents of the agreements need to be analysed before passing them in Parliament. He made those comments while addressing a media briefing this morning. Meanwhile, Parliamentarian Kabir Hashim highlighted the need for carefully negotiating with the bondholders in order to arrive at an agreement that is favourable for Sri Lanka.
We are glad that Sri Lanka was able to reach agreements with China and the official creditor committee, including India and Japan. We are not jealous of that. The President, who said that the proposal would be presented to Parliament, requested support in passing it. We are expecting to see what is included in these agreements. We want to know for how long the debt repayment was extended. It was said that debt repayment was postponed until 2028. We expect information in this regard.
It's very important on what concessions our country gains from the ISB restructuring. Initially, we had asked, I think our target was to have at least a minimum of a 30% haircut. And at one time, the bondholders themselves had agreed on a 20%. They had come up to a 20% haircut. But what we are hearing is with the macro-linked bonds, which is linked to a GDP upside. Whenever there is a GDP upside, this haircut can even drop down to 8.5% or 7.3%, which is something that we look at as a huge disadvantage to the country. So it is the onus and the responsibility of the government, I think, to negotiate. It's all about the skills of negotiation. Bondholders also have a responsibility that Sri Lanka is taking a chance with a new innovative methodology for this restructuring, and Sri Lanka is changing, moving course, and that we request the government to cap this haircut at a 20%, that we should, because the bondholders already agreed that at any level, that at a minimum of 20% that they could do this. So at in a upside, it should be at 20%, and we should go on a 30% at the lowest. That is at the lowest a 30% haircut. Because if you look at Ghana has a larger component of ISBs rather than bilateral loans, but they got a 37% haircut. And Sri Lanka, even 30 is not good enough, but 30 is the bare minimum that this country should push for. So that is what we have to remember. That is where we can talk about good news for the country when that really happens.
Now, leader of the National People's Power, Kumara says that the recent debt restructuring agreements are not a sustainable solution to Sri Lanka's economic crisis. He added that the government must formulate plans to increase state revenue and the dollar inflow in order to settle the country's outstanding debts.
The Kandy District Summit of the Banking and Finance Forum of the National People's Power was held yesterday under the patronage of NPP leader Kumara.
According to Ranil Wickremesinghe, Sri Lanka has achieved a national solution to coming out of the debt crisis. His alleged solution is to avoid paying debts. This is not a viable economic solution. What is the sustainable solution to this issue? Firstly, government revenue must be increased. Secondly, we must have a plan to increase our dollar inflow. We would like to ask Ranil Wickremesinghe about plans he has put in place to increase our dollar inflows during his 2.5-year tenure. We have reached a milestone where this rotten political culture must be changed. Though it has not been officially announced, a group of SLPP members have announced that they will support Ranil Wickremesinghe. This group comprises of Mahindananda Alutgamage, Lohan Ratwatte, Prasanna Ranatunga, Prasanna Ranavira and Nimal Lanza. What is going to happen? Ranil is attempting to revive the destructive political camp. Should we allow this? We as citizens of this country cannot allow that to happen.
Now let's take a look at some thoughts shared in the political arena today.
Yesterday, President announced a good news to the country. The opposition were continuously pointing out that the government was yet to restructure external debt. Now we have restructured external debt as well. We can guarantee that the time of hardships has now come to an end. We have no other option than to follow the path that the President has pointed out. We must give the opportunity for Ranil Wickremesinghe to continue his program.
To summarize the good news, we have not repaid any debts in 2 years and we will not be repaying any debt for the next 4 years. Isn't this the summary of this so-called good news? There will not be a debt write-off but an extension for repayment. This is the reason for all of these celebrations.
The only people who aren't celebrating this achievement are the ones with political agendas. We were also in a shameful position as we were the citizens of a bankrupt nation. But now we have overcome bankruptcy and the country is gradually moving towards development.
Some say that Ranil only went abroad to enjoy himself. Ranil didn't go abroad to enjoy himself. Yesterday's news was the result of his hard work. JVP-affiliated teachers' unions launched this protest yesterday to undermine this good news. They will continue to disrupt every good thing that happens to the country.
Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe met the chief prelates of the Malwatu and Asgiri chapters today to clarify the details concerning the international agreements reached on debt restructuring. The President highlighted to the chief prelates that he successfully completed the restructuring of foreign debt within the expected time frame of 2 years.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who arrived at the historic temple of the Sacred Tooth in Kandy this morning, participated in religious ceremonies and received blessings. Later, President Wickremesinghe met with the chief prelate of the Malwatu chapter, Most Venerable Tibbatuave Sri Sumangala Nayaka Thera, and presented the comprehensive city development plan for Kandy. He also briefed him on foreign debt restructuring.
සමහරයාගේ ප්‍රශ්න තියෙන නිසා 2022 ගුරුවරුන්ට ඒ ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨයටම පඩි වැඩි කරනවා. රුපියල් 3000 ඉඳන් 17000 වෙනකම්. සමස්තයක් ඇටියට 7000 8000ක් වැඩි වුණා. ගිය අවුරුද්දේ තීරණය කරන 10000 දිනය ගැන ස්වාමීන් වහන්සේ සමහරව මට කිව්වා එතෙන්ට දෙන්න එපා කියලා 2022 පඩි වැඩිවීමක් තිබුණ නිසා. ඒ දැන් ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම මම කිව්වා නෑ එයාට දෙන්න අපි සියලු දෙනාටම දෙමු. දැන් බලනකොට සාමාන්‍යයෙන් එක අයට 10000 ලැබුණාට මේ අයට 13000 ඉඳන් 27000 වෙනකන් ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් අනික් අයගේ ඉල්ලීම් ඉෂ්ට කරන්නේ නැතුව මේක කරොත් තව ප්‍රශ්නයක් එනවා. අපිට ඉස්සෙල්ලා තියෙන්නේ අනික් අයගේ ඉල්ලීම් ටික ඉෂ්ට කරලා මෙතෙන්ට එන්න. කරන්න පුළුවන් මෙච්චරයි කියලා කියනවා නම් අපි කිව්වයි ඒක පිළිගන්නේ නැහැ. ඒගොල්ලෝ කියන්නේ එයාගේ ඉස්සෙල්ලා ගන්න කියලා. ගුරුවරුන්ගේ එච්චර ප්‍රශ්නේ නැහැ. ගුරු සංගම්මෙක් ඔය ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවා. දැන් මම කොමිටියක් පත් කරලා තියෙනවා 20 25 වර්ෂයේ ඉඳන් මේ ටික ලැබලා දෙන්න. ඉන අවුරුද්දට කොහොමද මම හිතන්නේ ආර්ථිකය යන විදිහට අපිට යම්කිසි සහනයක් දෙන්න පුළුවන් වෙනවා.
Later, President Ranil Wickremesinghe visited the Asgiri Mahaviharaya and received blessings from the chief prelate of the Asgiri chapter, Most Venerable Varkagoda Sri Nyanratana Thera.
වහන්සේ දුන්න කාර්යයට උපදෙස් වලට විශේෂයෙන්ම සුද්ධිවන්ත වෙනවා. බාරගත් ඇදීක අමාරු වැඩ කටයුත්තක් තිබුණේ වහන්සේත් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී සහයෝගය දුන්නා. ඕවාද කරා උපදෙස් දුන්නා. කොහොමද බලාපොරොත්තු තිබුණේ අවුරුදු දෙක ඉවර වෙන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා මේ වැඩ කටයුත්ත කරා. ඒක සාර්ථකව කරලා තියෙන අපි දැන් අපනයන ආර්ථිකයකට යන්නේ.
Subsequently, President Wickremesinghe visited the Selvam Vinayagar Hindu temple in Katukale, Kandy and received blessings. Later, he visited the Mira Makkam Jumma Masjid in Kandy, where he interacted with the local community after receiving blessings.
Welcome back. Now, the US Embassy in Colombo, together with the Department of Import and Export Control, launched the first iteration of Sri Lanka Strategic Trade Forum, bringing together a diverse audience from the government and the private sector to address critical aspects of trade security and explore the development of competitive practices for global trade hubs. During the forum yesterday, trade regulators from Malaysia, the Philippines and Singapore showcased their national strategies for overseeing the trade and transshipment of strategic items, including any dual-use goods or technologies that can be used for both commercial and military applications. US Ambassador in Colombo, Julie Chung, emphasized the balance necessary for robust trade, stating that the challenge lies in achieving an equilibrium between enabling smooth trade and ensuring robust security measures. Now, in other business news, the Colombo Stock Exchange closed in red today, dragged by losses in financial and industrial stocks. The Colombo Stock Exchange all-share price index dropped to 0.59% to settle at 12,188.79 points. Trading volume on the index fell to 40.9 million shares, from 75.2 million in the previous session. The S&P Sri Lanka 20 meanwhile dipped 0.75% to end at 3,601.37 points. Equity markets turnover fell to 1.01 billion rupees from 1.86 billion rupees in the previous session. The banking sector was the top contributor to the market turnover, while the food and beverage and tobacco sector was the second highest contributor. Foreign investors were net sellers, offloading stocks worth 71.9 million rupees while domestic investors were net buyers, purchasing shares worth 962.3 million rupees. Let's take a look at the rupee exchange rates during the day. That's all the news we have for you tonight. Thank you. Have a great night.